そう。2乗して16になる数。同じ数をかけて16になる数。答えはわかる？
4ですか？
そう、正解。
This film begins with a woman named Sachiko. Once, teaching was not just her profession, but her identity. Education gave her a sense of purpose that went beyond routine or recognition. Then life shifted. Marriage entered her world, bringing warmth, stability, and new responsibilities. Like many people who step into a new chapter, Sachiko made a quiet decision to pause one part of herself so she could nurture another. From the outside, her life appeared calm and settled. She spent more time at home, cared for her family, and adapted to a slower rhythm. Yet inside, the part of her that loved learning never disappeared. It waited patiently. She began tutoring small groups at home, sharing knowledge in modest ways, not to prove anything, but simply to stay connected to who she was. Sometimes she would talk to her husband about courses she found interesting, or the idea of returning to teaching someday. These were not demands. They were gentle expressions of longing. Her husband listened, but his reactions carried hesitation. He worried about her health, about exhaustion, about whether taking on more would disrupt the balance they had built. His concern was real, rooted in care rather than control. And yet, between concern and support, a quiet tension began to form. Not through arguments or raised voices, but through pauses, deflections, and unspoken doubts. The kind of tension that doesn't explode, but slowly settles into the space between two people. Sachiko noticed this shift. She sensed that her dreams were becoming something delicate to mention, something that needed to be softened before being spoken aloud. She understood her husband's worries, and part of her even appreciated them. But another part felt unseen, as if her inner drive was being gently placed on a shelf for safekeeping. She didn't feel angry. She felt conflicted. At the heart of this story is not a battle between right and wrong, or sacrifice and selfishness. It's a quiet emotional crossroads many couples reach without realizing it, where love tries to protect, and identity quietly asks for room to breathe. As time passed, the tension that lived quietly between Sachiko and her husband began to shape their daily rhythm. Nothing dramatic happened on the surface. Meals were shared, routines continued, and the house remained peaceful. But beneath that calm, both of them were carrying unspoken weight. This is often how emotional distance begins, not with conflict, but with silence. Sachiko started to notice small changes in herself. She told herself she was being considerate, that this was part of compromise. Yet each time she held back, a subtle sense of loss followed. Her husband, on the other hand, believed he was doing the right thing. From his perspective, love meant protection. He saw Sachiko's energy, her tendency to give deeply, and worried that she would overextend herself. In his mind, rest equaled safety. Stability equaled happiness. What he didn't fully see was that for Sachiko, learning and teaching were not burdens, but sources of renewal. This mismatch in perception is common in relationships, where care is offered in the form the giver understands, not always in the form the receiver needs. Small misunderstandings began to accumulate. When Sachiko mentioned a new tutoring idea, he would respond with practical concerns. When she shared her excitement about a course, he would gently redirect the conversation toward balance and caution. None of these moments were harmful on their own, but over time, Sachiko began to internalize the message that her aspirations were risky, inconvenient, or unnecessary. From a psychological lens, both were caught in protective patterns. Sachiko protected the relationship by minimizing herself. Her husband protected the relationship by trying to limit uncertainty. Ironically, both forms of protection created distance. She felt less expressive. He felt increasingly responsible for maintaining harmony. And when responsibility replaces curiosity, empathy slowly fades. Sachiko would reflect on her day and feel a vague restlessness she couldn't explain. She wasn't unhappy, but she wasn't fully present either. Her husband sensed this shift too, though he struggled to name it. He interpreted her quietness as fatigue, not as an unmet emotional need. This is the delicate moment many couples face. When love is still there, intentions are good, but understanding hasn't caught up. Without awareness, such moments can solidify into long-term patterns. Sachiko stood at the edge of that possibility, feeling the growing distance between who she was becoming and who she felt allowed to be, unsure of how to bridge that gap without causing harm. The turning point came quietly, through emotional clarity. Sachiko spoke honestly about her passion for teaching, not as rejection, but self-expression. Her calm vulnerability helped her husband truly listen, realize his fears, and understand that growth, not control, sustains balance in a relationship. In the days that followed, he began to observe Sachiko differently. He noticed how energized she was after tutoring sessions, how her mood lifted when she talked about learning. Instead of immediately worrying about consequences, he allowed himself to become curious. He started researching the courses she had mentioned. At first, this was simply an attempt to understand her world. But as he read, something unexpected happened. The ideas intrigued him. The topics resonated with parts of himself he had long neglected. Learning, which he once saw as an added strain, began to feel like a shared bridge rather than a personal risk. In that shared space, tension softened. The relationship didn't transform through compromise, but through recognition. Two people finally seeing each other as evolving individuals, not fixed roles. In the end, Sachiko did not choose between her marriage and her passion. She chose integration, and her husband did not lose stability by letting go of control. He gained connection. This is perhaps the most enduring lesson of all. When love creates space instead of boundaries, both people find room to become more fully themselves together. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that explore relationships, growth, and the psychology behind everyday life.